Okay.
Yeah, so take it
All
away.
right. Thank you. Well, I guess I'll start just by introducing myself. Um, I see everybody has their camera off. I'm just wondering if maybe we could turn it on just so we could see each other for and then you can turn it off. But yeah, hi. It seems weird like talking to it like a bunch of black boxes. So if you don't mind, that would be great. But of course, feel free to, if you need to shut your camera off, that's fine too. But let me just introduce myself. I'm Peggy McGillicuddy, and I work for the National Association for Children of Addiction. And, we provide advocacy and support for kids, youth that are growing up in families that are impacted by substance use disorder. And my primary work that I've done since I was in my 20s is working with the youngest members of the family. So, kids ages 7 to 12. I've also worked a lot with teens. Um, and it's work that I feel really passionately about, especially coming from a family where both of my parents struggled with addiction, as I'm sure some of you may be able to relate to that as well. So it's really important work. I was really excited to be asked to present this webinar. Really excited because, peer recovery, the work that you do is so important. And really it has such an impact on families. So I want to acknowledge that before I start. Um, and I really just want to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour just talking about working with kids. I know that Karen had let me know that it can be a challenge sometimes, and I know that because I've been working with kids. And it really can sometimes feel like you're working in a completely different world when it comes to kids. I find it's a lot easier to talk with adults about addiction than it is little kids. And I also think it can be a real challenge for people. But what I do want you to know as we kind of move through my PowerPoint is that you probably have a lot more skills than you think you have, and you're probably already doing a lot of things right. So that, and I'm going to just probably spend about 30 to 45 minutes kind of going through the slides. I do have some scenarios, and I'd also like to invite you, if you have questions or if you've had an experience where, you've kind of struggled with, oh, I'm not sure if I handled that correctly, that there's also going to be some time for us to kind of get into that discussion together. So feel free as we go to put some questions in the chat. Um, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay, just all right. So what I'm really hoping for today is just to kind of take a look at just increasing your comfort with working. I know that your primary focus is going to be the adult in the family that's been struggling with substance use disorder or addiction. But just looking at, that means you're exposed to the whole family. So let's kind of increase your comfort level in doing that. I'm briefly going to talk about the impact of addiction on kids. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there are a lot of people who really honestly think that kids are not impacted, or that they don't know what's going on in the family. And I also, you probably received an email with just some kind of practical tools for you to take a look at and use when you're working with families. We'll also talk about developmentally appropriate language with kids and teens, because you're going to be using really different language than you do with the adults that you're working with. And then just really, I always like to focus on the hope and resilience of this work because it's really huge. So keeping that in mind as we go through. And perhaps I can't really see the chat. So hopefully, if we do have questions, maybe um, Cody will be able to share those with me.
Everyone should be able to access the chat by looking at the bottom of the Zoom window, and there should be a chat icon that should either open it in the side of your Zoom window or open it in a separate, smaller window.
Oh, got it. Okay. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Now I can see it. Okay, so why does this work matter? And what we do know is that there's about 1 in 4 kids that are impacted by family addiction. Um, so that's a lot of kids. I always think of it as you're in a classroom, you look around, and 1 out of every 4 kids in that classroom is living with addiction in the family. Children also are what I call the invisible clients. Excuse me, my throat is a little scratchy, so I'll be sipping. They are the first to be impacted, and they are the very last to be helped. And what we do also know is that early support equals long-term resilience. I know I also work with parents in my work, and I do know that most of the parents that I work with are the same little kids from yesterday that never got help themselves. So, I see this work as, when we can intervene and support families and also children in those families, there's a better outcome for everybody because we do know this is a family disease. Um, and how does addiction impact children? And, I always, when I'm talking with folks, I always encourage you to think about yourself as a kid, right? Um, and when we're growing up in a family where, say a parent is struggling with addiction, there's a lot of confusion that happens. For kids, they often they may not know the name of the problem in the family. They may not know that it's called addiction, but they do know that there's a problem, and they see the behaviors that go along with it. And generally, what happens with kids is that when nobody has explained what's happening in the family, they look around, nobody's talking about it, nobody's addressing what's happening. Everyone's kind of pretending like everything's okay. And then it comes back to, well, maybe it's me, maybe I'm the problem. There's also often a lot of fear and anxiety. Kids worry a lot about parents dying. The anxiety of, okay, when I'm coming home from school today, what's mom going to be like? So that kind of anxiety that kids are living with. And then shame and secrecy. We all know there is still so much stigma attached to this. No matter, how much we work on it, there's still a lot of judgment, still a lot of just still a lot of misconceptions about addiction as a disease. So that comes with a lot of shame and secrecy. Kids have loyalty conflicts in the family. I don't know if many of you are familiar with kind of the family roles of addiction, how each family member sort of takes on a role, and when the disease has impacted all of them. And then parentification. I know the kids that I work with are often acting like little adults, and probably you may have witnessed that in the families that you're supporting as well. So kids are realizing, okay, it's my job to take care of my brother. It's my job to make sure things are okay. Um, and my job to kind of make the family feel better. And that's a big responsibility. I primarily run groups with kids. And when they come into my group and they're with me, and I usually do 4-day intensive groups with children, and I let them know, hey, when you come in here in this group while you're with me, your job is just to be a kid, and I'll be the adult. Um, and that's a message that you can also send to the kids that you work with. I always just like to show what I think is the best definition of what happens in families with addiction. So, and I've got 2 pieces of art. This one was drawn by a 10-year-old boy, and you can see that, in this drawing, uh, what is the biggest thing in the family? It's that disease, and it has control of everybody. This one I also think is a perfect example of what happens in families. So as you can see in this piece of art, the alcohol is the biggest thing present. The dad is running after that alcohol. Mom is focused on dad. And then who's focused on those 2 kids? Nobody. And that's what happens in families where addiction has taken hold of. And again, I feel like two great definitions of the family disease concept. So when you are working with kids, um, in their head, they're asking questions like, hey, am I safe? Um, can I trust you? Is this my fault? Is one of those big ones that kids have. And am I alone? Again, as I mentioned, the adults in the family and often even teens too get more support than little kids. And I worked in addiction treatment for a long time. I was lucky enough to work at a treatment center in Southern California that had an excellent family program, but they also had a children's program. And that to me is full family recovery. So the power of that is that everybody is included. I will say there's very few treatment centers that actually offer anything for kids. Um, so keeping that in mind, and I'll also be able to share some resources that is out there for kids when we get toward the end of the session. So, what do kids need when they're living with addiction in the family? They need to have a sense of safety and belonging. Um, Boundaries are really important, and this I think can be a struggle sometimes, especially with a parent who's newly in recovery. And there haven't been any boundaries sometimes, or the boundaries are very blurred. It's not clear who the parent is in the family, and it can be a real struggle. We think to ourselves, oh gosh, this person's gotten sober, things are going to go smoothly now. Not so much. As you probably all know, it can be a real struggle because kids are wondering, can I trust the adults in my life anymore? And that takes some time. And kids, no matter what, no matter how much they push, they also need boundaries. In fact, they crave boundaries. And I know that I've worked with parents before who feel so guilty, having rules, and because they're just like, oh my gosh, my addiction has really hurt my child. I feel so bad. But the fact is developmentally, kids really need those boundaries. Um, they need education about the disease of addiction given in a very age appropriate way. And they need options for support outside of the family. So, helping kids to identify who are the safe adults in their life. It may not be a mom or a dad. It may be a teacher at school. It may be a next door neighbor. But helping kids to identify who those people are and where they can go to feel safe. And then, honestly, the most important thing for kids is a chance that they get a chance to be a kid and have fun. Fun and play that is the primary work of childhood. And again, many of the kids, I would say the majority of kids that I work with have not had a chance to just be a kid. They've been worried about grown-up problems. Um, they've been taking care of things that really aren't their responsibility. So making a lot of space for fun. And when you come into families and you're working, you've got little kids there, have some fun with them. I always have to do some research and find out like what are kids into now? What conversations can I have with them about what they think is cool and what's happening in their lives? And your role as peer recovery coach, and I know that you've been provided with a great deal of training around this, but just remembering, that you're not a therapist. You're there for peer support, which again, I think is one of the most powerful, often I think it's more important than therapy sometimes. Um, you're a safe, consistent adult. So again, you're going to model that behavior. You're consistent when you show up, you follow through. Um, and the good news about this is you're not there to fix the child. You're not there to fix what's going on. You're just there as a support. and just also a bridge to resources. And that is, those things are more than enough. I think as adults, and I know that I've had to struggle with this as a person who's working with kids, is we really want to fix things for little kids, right? And teens. We want to fix things, we want to make it better. Um, but this is enough. Providing that support, consistency, and the bridge to resources are all really important. And just remembering that there's just power in just showing up. And I'm not sure, how you all structure your visits with families, if it's in the home or if you meet, outside of the home. But just again, being that consistent person, following through, when talking with kids and families, using like that calm, non-judgmental tone. And when talking with kids, the most important thing to remember is to keep it simple. To give you an example of age appropriate language that I use with kids, I don't ever use clinical terms, which I'm sure that you all don't either. So I don't use the term substance use disorder. I use the term addiction. Sometimes I'll ask them to tell me what they think addiction is. And honestly, the definition that kids give is it's when somebody wants something more and more and they can't stop. And that's as deep as I get with kids, unless they ask more questions, which then it's perfectly fine to answer those questions. With teens, you can talk a little bit more in depth about what addiction is. Um, but yeah, just being very clear and simple and concrete in how you're speaking with kids. Staying away from 12-step language. And that's not to say that, hey, mom or dad, they're going to AA meetings. Absolutely, you can talk about that. But one thing that I see that parents do sometimes, parents who are newly in recovery, who are going to their meetings, who are really kind of just really embracing the groups that they're going to, and a lot of 12-step processes, is they start to sometimes use that terminology on their kids. So I've had a parent say, well, Joey, I already can tell he's got a lot of character defects. He's gonna be an addict like me. Well, Joey is 7, and, 7-year-olds have a lot of ways of acting that can sort of look like character defects, but they're actually just what's developmentally appropriate for that age. And so I really try to warn parents not to do that, and not to look at their child and say, oh, I know for sure they're going to be an addict or an alcoholic. Um, so keeping that in mind, and you model that as well when you're working with families. Um, and then just normalizing feelings with kids. A lot of times kids haven't had a chance to talk about their feelings. So just acknowledging that, yeah, hey, I understand that you're angry. That makes a lot of sense. Validating those feelings that they have and normalizing that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel sad. Um, it's okay to feel worried. And then, most importantly, when talking with kids, you're not there to interrogate um, um, or ask a lot of questions. What you're there for is just to create a space. And if a child is willing to share, then they will. Let me see. Okay. And then there are just some core messages that kids need to hear. In one of the handouts that I sent, it's called the 7 C's, um, which the 7 C's, and I never can remember them all, but it's a handout that you can even bring that with you to visits with the family. And what that covers is, hey, what are the things I can't change in my family, but what can I do for myself? So I didn't cause the addiction. I can't cure it, but what can I do? I can celebrate myself by making healthy choices, and communicating my feelings and asking for help. So those are all things that kids can do. And I mean, honestly, I think it kind of works for adults too. But yeah, the core message of this that kids really need to hear is this is not your fault. You know, mom doesn't drink because or struggle with addiction because you're doing poorly in school. This is not your fault. You are not alone. You know, when I'm working in groups with kids, the most powerful thing is that all of a sudden they're sitting there in group and they're looking around and they're like, wow, other kids have problems like mine. I am not alone. And as you all know, that is such an important piece in the recovery process. You can talk about it. It's okay to talk about your feelings. You know, sometimes you know kids, if they don't want to talk about it, sometimes you know encourage them. Hey, draw a picture about what you're feeling, and also just that there are safe adults to talk to. And again, helping kids and teens to really look at who are those safe people in their lives that they can trust and go to. And then this is just my philosophy of working with kids: listen, observe, validate, educate, and empower. I want to touch a little bit on the validate part because what I've seen, and I've done it myself. Believe me, I've made all the mistakes that are there to make in working with kids and teens. But you know, I've seen sometimes a child will share, like, you know, gosh, I was it was really hard when mom was drinking, and I felt really sad when this happened. Um, and then I hear an adult say, "Oh yeah, but isn't it great that they're in recovery now? Doesn't that make you happy?" And right away you can see the change in the child's face, because hey, that's not what they were talking about. They were talking about feeling sad, and we don't have to jump in and fix that feeling for them. They get to have that feeling without us going and saying, hey, but remember, now your parent is getting sober. um, so yeah, just really validating, educating kids, again keeping it simple, and then just empowering kids. I always like to look for, you know, the triumphs, the big and the little triumphs, right? And it could be that, you know, gosh, I was talking to your dad and he said you got along really great with your sister this week. That's awesome. You know, things like that are really empowering. So I want to take a pause here. I'm just looking. I don't. Oh, we have 14 people, so that's pretty good. Um, I'm wanting, I'd like to actually just kind of open it up for discussion right now. And I do have a couple of scenarios, but I also, if any of you have some scenarios that you've experienced working in families where there's kids, please share those. So I want to just, if you all just take a look at this particular scenario and take a few minutes just to read it through. And then I'm just wondering, what do people notice about this? How do you feel like it should be handled? What are some thoughts from all of you? And just feel free to raise your hand or speak out.
Hi,
Hi, Karen.
Peggy.
Hi.
One of the things I see in here, and I've heard this over and over and over again, is that the child picks up on the hopelessness.
Mhm.
And so, it's like she's bitter now, but it's always that but that gets you, you know? And
Yes.
so feeling that, okay, it's better right now, but, and then anticipating, and to me, that's kind of a hopelessness thing
Mhm.
that is sometimes hard for kids to navigate that piece.
Yes, absolutely. Which is really what's going on, I think, in this scenario, right? With Liam, because that is a big question that kids have. Like, okay, that's great. Mom hasn't had a drink in 3 months, but when's the ball going to drop? So any ideas of how you might handle this or how you might respond to Liam in this scenario? It's okay if you don't have any because I have some on the next slide too. Mm. So this is a question that comes up frequently, especially with the kids that I work with. So, yeah, mama said she's better now, but is she going to mess up again? So, let's just take a look at a suggested response. So, first of all, you want to approach it in a very calm way, and acknowledge that, yeah, this is a really important question. And a lot of kids wonder that. So when you do that, you're reminding them you're not alone. A lot of kids have this question. And then pause, give some space. I'm a big person, especially when I'm doing group on, the value of silence sometimes. Less is more. Um, and then, you just might want to acknowledge, hey, you know what? Your mom is working really hard on her recovery right now. And there are people like me who are helping her with that. So, letting them know that, hey, not only are you not alone, but mom's not alone. And she's got support out there. Um, and normalize this without making promises, because this is a very, very valid question. And it's also a question that is a result of a pattern of behavior, which is often includes broken promises, parents not showing up for kids. Um, and so it is, we don't have to fix that feeling, right? We don't have to fix it. But it is important to acknowledge that, yeah, there is support and help out there. And then just letting them know, normalize without making promises. The last thing, when I've worked with parents, I've also let them know, never ever promise that you're not going to drink again or use drugs again. Don't ever make that promise. You can promise that you're going to work really hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. You're going to work really hard to keep addiction away, but you cannot promise that. And so that can be some feedback that you provide to parents as well. And, letting them know what I can tell you, this is not your fault. And you don't have to figure these feelings out on your own. And then just also grounding it in safety. You've got adults around you who care about you. We can even talk about who those adults are, but it is a valid concern. I'll give you an example. I had a little boy who came to one of my programs, and there's a lot going on in his family. There was some domestic violence. There was his dad was the person that was struggling with alcohol addiction. He had been in jail a few times, and I knew this history, when this little boy came in. He was 8 years old. And so in my adult mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is what he's going to be focused on, all of these things, right? Well, the bottom line is what he was the most bothered by, and what he talked about the entire time he was in group, was the fact that his dad would promise and promise to come to his basketball games and he would never show up. And those were promises that were broken many, many times. And that was huge for that little boy. So remembering that it does take time for kids to gain that trust back. And it's okay to have hope. I mean, I do think that kids have hope regardless. But just, being that reminder of, the good news about this is there's a lot of support for both you and your family. And so why does this kind of conversation work? And I mean, again, it doesn't have to be exactly this conversation, but you're not making any guarantees about recovery, because we all know that's a hard, recovery is hard, and relapse does happen at times. You're normalizing the child's fear, and acknowledging that, reinforcing it's not their fault, emphasizing safety. And you're keeping within that coach role, right? So again, you're not there to fix. You're not there to delve deeper. You're just there to listen and uh, provide that support. And what not to do, and I kind of touched on this. Oh, don't worry about that. That's not going to happen. Ignoring the question. And here's another thing about ignoring. If you don't know the answer to the question, it's perfectly fine. That's not ignoring the questions. It's always okay to say to kids, you know what? I don't know the answer to that right now. Let me see what I can find out for you. Um, Over explaining addiction and recovery. I think as adults, we kind of jump into a lot of words coming out of our mouth as we explain stuff. We don't need to do that. Just keeping it simple. And just remembering that, small moments matter. Um, Remembering kids' names, asking about their interests, noticing something they're proud of, um, even just like, hey, I noticed in your bedroom you have a lot of, a lot of superhero figures. What's your favorite one? Celebrating those small wins, and letting them be kids are all really important. And then just remembering too, when you're supporting the parent, you are supporting the child. You're supporting the whole family. Um, and when parents get that support, they become more regulated, more consistent, and more supported in their recovery. Kids feel that immediately. Um, Kids pick up on everything. And so they're going to sense that help that you're providing. So your work with their caregiver is directly helping the child, even if the child isn't always the focus. So keeping that in mind as well. I have a second scenario. I'm wondering if it would be helpful if we maybe did 2 breakout rooms and you all could kind of discuss this amongst yourselves and then come back. Does that sound like something, Karen and Cody, we could do?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me a
Okay.
second to set the breakout rooms up.
Okay.
I'm going to create 2 breakout rooms, assign automatically. Um, I'll assign manually. So, or Peggy, do you want to be in one of the rooms?
Um, can I go back and forth?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
You know what? That's okay. I don't need to be in a room. We'll just take like 5 minutes to discuss and we can all come back and discuss it together.
Okay.
The one thing I am wondering is, will they be able to see this scenario in the breakout rooms?
Probably not.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. In that case, okay. Well, then maybe we don't do breakout rooms.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry to get everybody excited. Okay. So let's talk about this scenario, but I really want to hear from all of you. Not all of you, but some of you. Just some ideas. How would you handle this? What do you think needs to happen here? Um, so take a few minutes, read that through, and then let's open it up for discussion. Any comments or any questions?
These are important conversations,
Mhm.
Peggy.
Yes. Has anybody experienced anything like this before?
Certainly.
Mhm. Okay. So, yeah, so this is a scenario it's happened. I've had this experience before. So, in this particular case, this is a 10-year-old Ava, And what I like about this scenario too is it's always, we think kids aren't listening. Ah, there we go. Whitney, validate Ava's feelings first. Absolutely. Absolutely. If anything, that's probably one of the most important pieces for sure. Um, yeah, and I think sometimes we think that kids aren't picking up on things, but if any of you are parents, and I'm sure that quite a few of you are, that's not true. Like nothing gets by them. Um, and so, yeah, you may be approached. Sometimes when mom is using, I had to take care of my little brother, not uncommon, like all the time. Yes, and I like this. Candace just shared, ask what she is feeling and not assuming. Exactly. Assumptions are, I've done it before, made assumptions about what somebody's feeling. And yeah, saying, gosh, that must be really hard. What's that? What did that feel like? Um, so not making those assumptions. And then this is a big one. One time, she didn't wake up and I thought she was dead. Please don't tell anyone. I'm not supposed to talk about it. And that sometimes also is a message that kids have heard. Um, some of the families that you may work with may be involved in the child, may be involved in child welfare, child protective services, whatever it might be. So keeping that in mind as well. So let's just take a look at what could a possible response be. So again, staying calm and grounded. This is really important, especially when kids are sharing stories with you. And I've heard some stories from kids that um, are really, really, really tough to hear, and really tough to imagine that they've gone through something like that. So, not responding with, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. But keeping that, calm tone. And yeah, acknowledging, validating Ava's feelings first. I'm really glad that you told me. That sounds scary, and a lot for one person to carry. But then again, as Candace said, asking, what was that like for you? That's a question that I like to use with kids a lot, especially older kids. What was that like for you? Or tell me more. Those open-ended questions that can kind of get the conversation flowing. And then just really acknowledging, wow, you shouldn't have had to go through that. I'm sorry that you had to go through that by yourself. And then, this is something, and that I'm sure that you all have gone over in terms of your work with families. But, and in this situation, I don't think that they're, because the person's in recovery, um, it's not anything that's an emergency. But letting them know that, hey, part of your job, and I'm assuming that you all are, maybe Karen, you can clarify this for me, mandated reporters. Okay. Yeah. So again, with that, I keep it really simple with kids. My job is to help keep your family and you safe, right? And if I ever am worried about someone's safety, I may have to talk to another adult to get help. Um, but I also always say, if I'm going to do that, I will let you know. Um, when I do groups with kids, we have our confidentiality rule, which is what we say here stays here. I'm very clear with, there are times when I have to break that rule. One is if somebody's going to hurt you physically, if somebody's hurting you emotionally, if somebody's just neglecting you and not taking care of you, and then also if there's sexual abuse. But if you share that with me, I will have to tell somebody, but I'll talk to you first. And I'm going to tell you right now that more often than not, I'll have a child come up to me and say, you know what, I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to have to break that confidentiality rule. And I'm like, okay, because kids want to be safe. So, keeping that in mind as well. Reassuring and just sort of reducing fear, right? And this particular scenario is probably one that a lot of children have experienced, especially when we're talking about opiate use disorder and things like that. And then just grounding them back into safety and support, letting them know that, hey, like it's really brave to talk about this. Um, and thank you for sharing that with me. So yeah, when a child shares something big, practice active listening just as you would with adults. I, say less, less words is the better. Staying calm, validating, um, just as, I'm really glad you told me that. Um, and then following protocol if needed, whatever that protocol is within your organization. Okay, now I just would like to open it up for discussion, some questions. Yeah, how about any questions that folks have?
This is a pretty quiet group today.
I know.
I think what giving some example responses was very helpful to me because in my head,
Mhm.
I'm like, do I want to say this out loud in front of everybody? Because what if I'm responding the wrong way? But you kind of
Mhm.
validated even for me, like, okay, the way I would have responded to that situation is correct,
Right.
or maybe I could change this a little bit. So,
Hmm.
I mean, that's why I didn't jump up and be like, well, this is what I do because I was kind of unsure,
Yeah.
So I think you
Yeah.
sharing that and giving us an idea of which direction to take it was very
Hmm.
helpful.
Well, and that makes sense, right? Because I really do think I do think we get so nervous about talking with children. And I know, we're afraid to say the wrong thing. Um, and but as I mentioned at the beginning, you all are probably already using the skills that you have and using them properly with kids. And even, teens in the family. So knowing that you know more than you think you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
You know, one of the things that I think is challenging, is when you're working with both the kids and the parents.
Yeah.
And how do you, because if you hear from both, although you're not the therapist by any stretch of the imagination, but you do hear things, and how do you navigate that? Well, what did my kid say? Or what did my mom say? Or what did my dad say? I mean, I've seen that happen a lot, and
Hmm.
it puts the person in the middle of that. And so navigating that dynamic, because you do get a lot of information,
You're
from
right.
everybody. So how do you navigate that dichotomy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure, what sort of procedures or policies that you have in place. I generally will, even the parents that I work with, even though I've explained that what people share with me, I keep confidential unless it's a matter of safety. They still will. Will come to me and say, well, what did my son talk about? And generally, my answer is just going to be, you know what? They're doing a great job sharing their feelings, or, uh, or I'll say something like, you can tell that, recovery is really happening in this family. So saying something really general, and then even just being honest, like, gosh, why don't you ask them? Right.
Mhm.
And then and also letting I think it's really important too to let parents know that the kids don't have to tell them everything about how they're feeling. And a lot of times it's easier for kids to share with somebody else because they're often wanting to protect that parent's feelings, right? So it's okay. It's perfectly normal for kids to maybe share with their peers or, perhaps with, you all as a safe adult, something that they might not share with their parent. Um, and so really, I think providing parents with education on that is really important. That's really just kind of, especially when you're talking about teenagers too, because the developmental stage for teenagers is that struggle for independence. So providing parents with just that information. There was another thing I was going to say. It just left my head really quickly, but um, yeah, I think just well, and if a child or a teen asks, "Hey, what is my mom talking about?" Um, Again, I think I would just say, your mom's working really, really hard on recovery instead of getting into specifics because it's not your job to get pulled in the middle. That's not fair to any of you.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, and I mean, my next slide was a quote on boundaries. Um, Talking about boundaries with families, which is probably some of what you're already doing. Because my experience working with families that are newly in recovery is they're really struggling with what boundaries even look like. Um, And so, you holding that boundary of, yeah, I talked with your dad. He's really working hard in his recovery. Or, yeah, you know what? I talked with your son, and he's proud that you're going to you're going to those meetings. So something very general like that. I see Whitney had a question. How would you approach the situation of emotional abuse with a teenager? Would it be similar? So my question about that is emotional abuse in terms of coming from the parent, or is it coming from the teenager? Whitney, maybe you could clarify that. Coming from the parent. Okay. Um, so this again would be where, and I'm not sure if you have, resources available, but this would be more of like, let's give some education on parenting and also on what is emotional abuse. For some families, they don't even know that that's not normal communication. Um, but if a child is disclosing abuse, then that would be something that you would need to follow whatever procedures are in place within your organization, which I'm assuming that there are some of those in place, specifically about mandated reporting. Okay. Right. So I've recently encountered this. A teenager is scared to say too much because they do not want to get their parent in trouble. So I think this is where you have to go back to being honest with the teenager about what the limits are in terms of, what you can keep private. So, and emotional abuse is a really difficult one because I've made many child abuse reports, and often when you're reporting emotional abuse, that's a really, sometimes they don't even take a look at that. But I would suggest if that is happening and the teenager is reporting it, first of all, number one, Whitney, I would say to reach out and get some support for yourself from, within the organization. Um, this is what I was worried about as far as getting screened out with CPS. Yes. So, um, so yeah, I would be honest with the teenager about, hey, I'm a safe adult, but there are some things that, I need to talk to somebody else. And somebody else would be, CPS. So then that gives you, and that gives the child the chance to decide. And I have done this with kids, and they said, I think I have something to share, but I'm afraid that you might have to break that confidentiality rule. And I'll say, well, you know what? Yeah, yes, like if you are being hurt, I would have to break that rule. So it's your decision to tell me or not. If they then continue to tell you, then you know it's serious. It's I mean, not that it's not serious anyway, but then you know this is a child that's really, really needing help. And oftentimes, Child Protective Services, their goal is to keep the family together. I'm not saying that it's done perfectly, um, but often what it means is that that family is going to get connected to some resources, maybe a parenting class, whatever that may be. But I just think, again, it's a boundary. It's being really honest about what your boundary is as a peer recovery coach. And it's being, also sharing with parents that, hey, I'm here. Again, I'm a mandated reporter. That's part of my role. Part of my role is to keep that if I see something unsafe, I need to talk about that with somebody else. So just being really honest about what your role is there. Does that help, Whitney? It's a hard situation to be in. Yeah. Yeah. And, validating to that child, like, yeah, I understand that that's got to be hard. Um, you know, but in my experience, and child abuse reporting is not, no matter how many times you do it, it's not a pleasant thing to do. But I have worked with organizations who really set a plan in place when that has to happen. So, for example, I know when I do children's programs, if I'm going to need to make a report, I get the support from my colleagues. I'll have somebody sit with me sometimes when I make the report. If it is safe, I tell the parent I'm making the report, and I actually offer for them to make that call with me. So there are things that you do to support yourself and to support the family, to make it that it's not. And I always say to parents, this is not a reflection of you as a bad parent. This is a reflection on how addiction has impacted your family. And that's where so taking that shame away from it. I'll never forget just one short story. I was working with a family once, and I was working at a treatment center, and the mom was in treatment. The recommendation was for her to stay 90 days, but she wanted to leave after 30. And her child came to our children's program and shared some abuse that was really very severe. And so, we had to make a report. It was physical abuse. We had to make a report. So I sat with that mom. She had her counselor with her, and I shared with her, this is what your child shared. We need to, call and make a report on that. You can sit with me. We can do that together. And she just immediately started to cry. And she said, you know what? The same exact thing happened to me when I was a kid. I was really severely abused, and I promised myself I would never do it to my own children. And I have. And, she cried. We made the report. And then she decided she needed to stay in treatment for 90 days, right? Because I do think as well is that and I think this happens a lot, like when people go to treatment, we're so afraid to talk about these kind of situations, that people sometimes leave treatment or they get into recovery and they haven't addressed the things that happened to them when they were a kid, and they haven't addressed the shame that they feel about how their addiction may have impacted their child. And that is a huge relapse trigger. So, I always encourage parents, get help for yourself. If it's bringing up some things from your own childhood. But let's talk about this stuff. And, let's make sure that this pattern doesn't continue. So I think a lot of this can be healing in a lot of ways, but still hard. So, yeah. Was that helpful, Karen, in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, because those are the kinds of things that come up that are really awkward
Hmm.
and are sometimes, when you're in the moment, it's like, oh, what do I do?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think talking through these are some of the things that you may face, that you may hear, and here are some ways you can respond are really important.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, those are difficult situations. But I think also if a child or a teenager is sharing that with you, then I want you to think to yourself, they already know you're safe, right? Because they're not going to share that unless they feel like they can trust you, and that they can trust that you're going to make the right decision with that information. So yeah, I think we're just on 3 o'clock right now, and should I wrap things up? I guess coming to a
Yeah,
close. Okay.
that would be good.
Um, so just have a couple more slides, just connecting to resources. Um, feel free, Karen, you can pass on my contact information. I have a lot of resources in terms of there are children's programs, teen programs out there. Um, a lot of schools have a lot of support available, youth peer groups, Alateen, and then just resources for caregivers would be, really important. And then just remembering you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to know all the right words. You don't need to fix things. But your presence and your consistency and your care are enough. And then final takeaways. Your role is really powerful, even if sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Um, we know from research that even the presence of just one caring adult in a child's life can make a huge difference. And yeah, you are doing the work that you're doing. You're part of the solution. So I really want to thank all of you because it is hard work that you're doing for sure. Um, yeah, and that's all I have. So uh, yeah, I can yeah, Karen, you can share maybe forward my contact information to folks if they have any more questions. I'd be happy to um, yeah, to be there. A lot of what we do at NACOA is just answer questions and direct people to resources. So
I want to thank you, Peggy. This has kept coming up, conversations with kids. This was very informative, and I appreciate you taking some time to talk to our peer recovery coaches as they're navigating this new world of serving families rather than just the
yeah.
individual in recovery. They will have access to your information. We have shared your resources that you sent, and this will be on the portal, so they'll have access to
Oh,
this too.
perfect. Okay,
So,
great.
and
All
our
right.
TA
Yeah.
coaches also can share your
Okay.
contact information.
All right, perfect. Yeah,
Thank
and
you
you know
so
what?
much.
I'm always happy to talk about this. So anything you need, just reach out. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
And let me say just a word about NACOA. NACOA is one of our peer recovery advisory council members,
Mhm.
and has been very helpful as we have rolled this project out and providing feedback and helping us inform the work. So I want to recognize their participation in that. NACOA also helped on the writing of the third module of the curriculum.
Yeah.
Denise was very helpful there. So I want to thank NACOA publicly and let everybody know that NACOA is a member of our peer recovery advisory council to help with
Yeah.
this work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.